The hospital room was silent except for the soft hum of machines and the steady drip of medicine through a thin tube. Keanu Reeves lay in the bed, his face pale, his body weak. Outside the window, the city moved on, bright and loud. But inside that room, everything felt distant, heavy, and slow. He had been there for days, maybe weeks. He had lost count. At first, friends and people from work had sent messages. Some flowers had arrived, placed neatly on the table near the window. But as time passed, the calls grew less, the flowers wilted, and the silence grew stronger. Keanu had always been someone who carried his own pain quietly. He never asked for much, never wanted to trouble anyone. But this silence cut deeper than he expected. He thought maybe this time he really was alone. He closed his eyes and tried to remember better days. Moments on film sets, long rides on his motorcycle, evenings when he could just disappear into the crowd and no one would know his name. But in the middle of those memories came another picture, a face from years ago. Sandra Bullock. He remembered her laugh, her warmth, the way she always seemed to bring light even into serious moments. They had not seen each other in so long. Life had pulled them in different directions. Still, in this cold room, her memory came back like a soft flame in the dark. The nurse entered quietly, adjusting the monitors and checking his chart. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Reeves?" she asked kindly. "A little tired," he whispered, his voice thin, almost fragile. She nodded, giving him a gentle smile. "Rest is good. Just keep holding on." She left the room, and once again, the silence returned. Hours passed slowly. The rain started outside, tapping against the glass. Keanu turned his head slightly, watching the droplets race each other down the window. He thought of all the people who had once been close to him. Some were gone, some had drifted away. In that moment, he felt the weight of every lonely night he had endured. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Firm but careful. He didn't expect anyone. The door creaked open, and for a moment, he thought it was just another nurse or doctor making rounds. But then he saw her. Sandra Bullock stood at the doorway, holding an umbrella still dripping from the rain. Her eyes searched the room, then locked onto him. She looked almost the same as he remembered, only gentler, wiser. Her face carried both strength and kindness. "Keanu?" she said softly, her voice trembling with both shock and care. "Why didn't you tell me?" His throat tightened. He blinked, unsure if she was real or if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. "Sandra?" he whispered, disbelief in every syllable. She walked inside, slowly at first, then with more urgency. She placed the umbrella aside and came closer to the bed. The sight of her made something break inside him, the wall he had built to protect himself from loneliness. "You're here," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Of course I am," she replied, sitting down beside him. "Did you really think I wouldn't come?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, but inside the room there was warmth again. Keanu's hand trembled slightly as Sandra reached out and held it. Her touch was steady, full of comfort. "I thought I had no one," he admitted quietly, his voice cracking. Sandra shook her head. "You have me. You'll always have me." Those words echoed in his chest, filling the emptiness that had haunted him. For the first time in weeks, he felt something stronger than pain. He felt hope. The night stretched on, but neither of them cared. The hospital lights flickered softly. The machines hummed. And in that small room, two souls who had once shared laughter and stories found each other again. It was just the beginning. Neither of them knew what would come next, but one thing was clear. This moment would change everything. The rain outside did not stop. It poured harder, like the sky itself was carrying the weight of something heavy. Inside the hospital, Sandra sat quietly beside Keanu's bed, her fingers still gently wrapped around his. Hours had passed, yet neither of them noticed the time. For years they had lived in different worlds, their careers pulling them apart, life pushing them down different roads. Yet here they were, together again, in a place that felt fragile, yet strangely safe. Keanu's eyes studied her face. Every line, every trace of time told a story. It was not the same young woman he had met decades ago, but she was still Sandra, still the person who had once laughed at his jokes, Still the one who had once shared quiet dinners after long days of filming. "Why did you come?" he asked suddenly, his voice carrying more than curiosity. It carried fear, wonder, and disbelief. She looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Because I couldn't ignore it anymore. I heard you weren't well. I thought of all the times we shared. All the times you were there for me when I needed a friend. I knew I had to be here for you." Keanu swallowed hard. He had always been someone who kept his pain inside. He had never wanted to be a burden. Yet hearing those words, he felt a weight lift from his chest. The sound of thunder rolled outside. A nurse entered to check his vitals, but quickly noticed the way Sandra was holding his hand. She smiled politely, whispering, "It's good to see you have company tonight. Mr. Reeves." Keanu simply nodded, glancing at Sandra, as if silently admitting how much that presence meant. When the nurse left, Sandra leaned back in the chair, her eyes never leaving him. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "the first time we sat together on that bus?" Keanu's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Speed," he whispered. "Yeah, I remember. I was nervous. I didn't know how people would see me in that role, but you made it easy." Sandra's laugh filled the room softly, warm and comforting. "You were always so hard on yourself. But you never saw what the rest of us saw. You had this way of making people feel safe even when the world was falling apart on screen." He looked at her, his eyes shimmering with something deeper than gratitude. "And you brought light. I never forgot that." Their words lingered between them, heavy yet healing. It was as if years of unspoken thoughts were finally finding their way out, slowly breaking through the silence that had surrounded Keanu for so long. But then his chest rose and fell sharply. A sudden cough escaped him, deep and painful. Sandra quickly leaned forward, alarm on her face. "Keanu, are you okay?" He nodded weakly, though his hand tightened around hers. "Just the medicine," he muttered. The machines beeped louder for a moment before calming down again. Sandra's heart raced, her hand trembling as she brushed his hair back from his forehead. "Don't scare me like that," she whispered. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, breathing carefully before opening them again. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." "Don't you dare say sorry," she said firmly. "You've carried so much on your shoulders. It's okay to be weak sometimes. It's okay to let someone take care of you." Those words cut deep because they were true. Keanu had always been the one to carry others. He had given away parts of himself to the world, but rarely allowed anyone to see his own pain. Sandra stayed close, not letting go of his hand, even when he drifted into short moments of sleep. The storm outside grew heavier, the lightning flashing across the sky. Every time the thunder cracked, she glanced at him, as if afraid he would vanish, as if this moment was too fragile to last. When he stirred again, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You know, I thought about you a lot." She blinked, surprised by his honesty. "You did?" "Yes," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "In the lonely nights, in the silence. I always wondered where you were, if you were happy. Sometimes I thought about calling you, but I didn't want to disturb your life." Her eyes softened, filled with something close to sorrow. "Keanu, you would never disturb me. If only you knew how many times I thought of calling you, too." For a long time, they sat in silence again, but it was no longer the same silence as before. It was full of unsaid words, full of years that had passed but had not erased the bond between them. Then suddenly, the door opened again. Both of them turned their heads. Standing there was a young boy, no more than 12, holding a small bag of food in his hands. He looked nervous, his clothes slightly damp from the rain. "Mr. Reeves?" the boy asked shyly. Keanu frowned, confused. "Yes, I work at the little cafe down the street," the boy stammered. "You once came in there months ago, and you gave me the biggest tip I'd ever seen. You told me to never give up on school. I just wanted to say thank you. I heard you were here, so I brought you this soup." Keanu's breath caught. He looked at the boy with surprise, then slowly at Sandra, whose eyes were already glistening with tears. "You see," she whispered softly, "you were never alone. The kindness you gave to others is still here. It always comes back." The boy placed the bag gently on the table and gave a small smile before leaving the room. Keanu's chest rose with emotion. He could not hide anymore. He looked at Sandra again, his voice breaking. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. Sandra squeezed his hand tightly, her eyes full of quiet strength. You were never alone, Keanu. You just forgot how much you mean to people. The storm outside raged on, but inside that hospital room something had changed. Hope had slipped back in, carried not just by Sandra's presence, but by a stranger's gratitude, by the echoes of kindness that had never really disappeared, and for the first time in a long time, Keanu felt a spark inside him. Not of despair, but of something brighter, something worth holding on to. The morning light crept slowly into the hospital room. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind wet streets and a quiet freshness in the air. The soft glow of the sun fell across Keanu's face, highlighting the tired lines under his eyes, but also bringing a gentle calm. Sandra had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her hand still holding his, her head resting slightly against the edge of the bed. Keanu woke first, his gaze resting on her. For years, he had carried pain silently, never allowing himself to lean on anyone. But here she was, sitting through the long hours, refusing to leave him alone. He wondered why life had brought her back at this exact moment. He thought of the boy who had come the night before, the small act of gratitude that had broken through his loneliness. It stirred something deep inside him, something that reminded him of all the lives he had touched without even realizing. Maybe the universe was speaking to him in whispers, reminding him that even when he believed he had no one, his actions had left trails of kindness that found their way back. Sandra stirred awake, her eyes blinking open slowly. When she realized he was watching her, she smiled softly. "Good morning," she said, her voice husky from sleep. "Morning," Keanu whispered. "You stayed all night?" "Of course," she replied, stretching slightly, but never letting go of his hand. "Did you really think I'd leave you?" He shook his head faintly. "I'm just not used to it. Someone staying." Her smile faded, replaced by a quiet sadness. "That's the problem, isn't it? You've carried so much alone, but you don't have to anymore." Before he could answer, the door opened again. This time, a doctor stepped in, followed by a nurse carrying a clipboard. The doctor, a middle-aged man with calm eyes, approached the bed. "Mr. Reeves, we need to discuss your condition," he said. Keanu nodded slowly. Sandra straightened in her chair, her expression tense. "Your recovery will take time," the doctor explained carefully. "The treatments have helped stabilize you, but your body is weak. What you need most now is rest, proper care, and support. Without that, things could become more serious." The words lingered heavy in the air. Keanu lowered his gaze, his hand tightening around the blanket. He had faced battles before, losses that had nearly broken him, but hearing his vulnerability spoken aloud made him feel exposed. Sandra leaned forward. "What exactly does he need?" she asked, her tone steady but urgent. "Companionship, consistent care, and the will to fight," the doctor replied. "His spirit will play a big role in how well he recovers." Keanu closed his eyes. Spirit. Will to fight. He had always pushed through quietly, never asking for help. But now, even his strength felt thin. When the doctor left, silence filled the room again. Sandra's eyes were fixed on him, filled with determination. "You heard what he said," she whispered. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be here." "Sandra," his voice was strained. "Why would you put yourself through this? You have your own life, because you matter," she said firmly, "and because sometimes life brings us back to the people who need us most." He looked at her, unable to find words. Her presence felt like an anchor in a storm he had been drowning in for too long. Hours passed, filled with small conversations, memories from the past, and quiet moments where no words were needed. But just as the day began to feel lighter, another unexpected twist arrived. The door opened again, and in walked an older woman, carrying a small basket of flowers. Her steps were slow, but her eyes were bright. Keanu blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Lawson?" he said softly. The woman smiled warmly. "Yes, dear. I heard you were here. I had to come." Sandra looked confused, but Keanu's eyes softened with recognition. Mrs. Lawson was the widow of a man who had once worked with him on a small project years ago. After her husband had passed, Keanu had quietly paid for her living expenses until she could find her footing again. He had never told anyone, Never expected anything in return. You helped me when no one else would, she said, placing the basket on the table. You told me to keep believing in tomorrow. Now it's my turn to remind you of the same. Keanu's throat tightened. He could not speak. He simply reached for her hand, his eyes glistening. Sandra watched silently, her own heart moved by what she was witnessing. One by one, people who had felt his quiet kindness were now stepping back into his life, as if the world was refusing to let him believe he was forgotten. When Mrs. Lawson left, Sandra turned to him. You've spent your whole life giving without expecting anything back. Now it's your time to receive. He shook his head slowly, tears threatening to fall. I don't know if I deserve it. She touched his cheek gently, forcing him to meet her gaze. You do. More than anyone I know. The room fell quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was full of unspoken love, of gratitude, of second chances. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sandra leaned closer to him. Do you know what I believe, Keanu? She whispered. He looked at her, waiting. I believe sometimes life brings storms just to remind us who will sit with us through the rain. Those words sank into him deeper than medicine ever could. He realized then that his fight was no longer just about healing his body. It was about letting others in, about allowing kindness to return to him in ways he had long forgotten. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not feel afraid of tomorrow. The night stretched on, and the hospital lights dimmed to a softer glow. Outside, the city was alive with its usual rhythm, but inside Keanu's room, time seemed slower, gentler, almost sacred. Sandra sat near his bed, her presence steady and quiet, like a lighthouse guiding a ship through the storm. Keanu shifted slightly, his eyes heavy but his mind awake. Do you ever wonder, he began softly, why people walk into our lives when they do? Sandra tilted her head, watching him closely. All the time, she admitted. Sometimes it feels random, but maybe it's not. Maybe there are no accidents. He let her words sink in, staring at the ceiling. I thought my story was over. I thought there was nothing left but silence. And then you walked in. Then the boy came with soup. Then Mrs. Lawson with her flowers. Why now? Why all at once? Sandra leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Because life knows when we're about to give up. It sends reminders, people, moments, to show us we're still needed. Keanu closed his eyes, and for a moment, the weight of everything he had carried pressed down again. But now there was also something else, a faint spark of belief. The door creaked open. A young nurse entered, pushing a cart. Mr. Reeves, she said gently, we need to take some blood tests. He nodded faintly, watching as she prepared the equipment. Sandra stayed by his side, holding his hand as the needle slipped into his arm. He barely flinched, but she felt his fingers tighten around hers. After the nurse left, Keanu whispered, You know, pain never bothered me much. I can take pain. What I couldn't take was the emptiness. Sandra's eyes softened, her thumb brushing against his knuckles. Emptiness is loud, she said. It eats at you, but you're not empty anymore. Not now. Before he could answer, footsteps sounded again in the hall. The door opened slowly, and this time, it wasn't a nurse, a doctor, or an old friend. It was someone unexpected, a middle-aged man with tired eyes holding a guitar case. Keanu frowned, confused. Do I know you? The man smiled faintly. Not really. Years ago, I played music on a street corner downtown. One night, you stopped. You listened. You didn't just drop money in my case. You talked to me. You told me my music mattered. I never forgot that. It kept me going. I heard you were here, so I thought maybe tonight I could return the gift. Without waiting for an answer, the man gently opened the guitar case and pulled out the instrument. He sat quietly in the corner of the room and began to play. The notes were soft, warm, filling the sterile hospital air with something alive. Sandra's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting as the music washed over them. Keanu closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he felt calm. Not from medicine, but from memory, from the echo of kindness finding its way back to him. The melody carried them all into silence. Sandra reached for Keanu's hand again, her eyes glistening. "You see what's happening?" she whispered. "This is who you are. You gave light, and now it's finding its way back." Keanu's throat tightened. "But what if I can't make it through this? What if this is all just goodbye?" Sandra shook her head firmly. "Don't say that. Don't let fear write your ending. You're stronger than you think, Keanu. Stronger than even you know." The music continued, wrapping the room in something unexplainable. When the song ended, the man packed his guitar slowly and looked at Keanu. "You saved me when I thought I was invisible." "I just wanted you to know that." Keanu blinked, unable to stop the tears that formed. "Thank you," he whispered. When the man left, silence returned, but it was a different silence, gentle, not heavy. Keanu turned to Sandra. "All these people, they remembered me. I didn't think anyone would." "That's the thing about kindness," she said softly. "You may forget giving it, but the people who receive it never do." Her words settled deep into his heart, leaving him shaken and humbled. Later that night, when Sandra thought he had drifted to sleep, Keanu spoke again, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm scared." She looked at him, her chest tightening. "Of what?" "Of being forgotten again. Of healing and then going back to silence. What if this is just a moment, and after it passes, I'm alone again?" Sandra leaned closer, her hand resting gently on his face. "You won't be. Not as long as I'm here. I won't let you disappear into silence again." His eyes met hers, filled with raw vulnerability. He had never been good at showing his fears, but with her, it felt safe. "Promise me," he whispered. "I promise," she replied without hesitation. In that moment, it felt like something unspoken between them was sealed. Not just friendship, not just memories, but a bond that was deeper, stronger, unbreakable. The city lights outside flickered faintly. The hospital quieted into its midnight rhythm. Sandra leaned back in her chair, her hand still linked with his. Keanu closed his eyes not because of weakness, but because for the first time in so long he trusted that when he opened them again, someone would still be there. The hospital room was quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of waiting, of holding on to something fragile but full of meaning. The morning sun spilled through the window, painting soft lines across the white sheets. Keanu stirred, his breathing steady, but his body still frail. Sandra was there just as she had promised, her hand resting gently on his arm. The door opened softly, and the doctor walked in, his expression serious. Sandra sat up straighter, her heart tightening. "Mr. Reeves," the doctor began carefully, "your condition has shown some improvement, but I have to be honest. This road will not be easy. There may be setbacks. There may be days you feel worse before you feel better, but your body is fighting. The question now is, do you have the strength to keep fighting with it?" Keanu looked at the doctor, then at Sandra. His lips trembled slightly before he spoke. "I don't know, but sometimes I feel like I'm already too far gone." Sandra squeezed his hand hard. "Don't say that," she whispered. "You're not too far gone." "Not even close," the doctor nodded. "Hope is medicine too. Don't underestimate that." Then he left quietly, leaving them in the heavy weight of his words. Keanu leaned back, his eyes clouded. "Hope," he murmured, almost bitterly. "I've lost so much. People I loved, moments I thought would last forever. Sometimes I wonder how much more a person can lose before there's nothing left to fight for." Sandra's heart ached at his words. She leaned closer, her voice trembling but strong. "You think you've lost everything, but look around you, Keanu. People are walking through this door every day because you touched their lives. That boy, that woman, the musician, they came back for you. And I'm here too. You're not empty. You're overflowing. You just forgot how much you mean." His eyes glistened, but before he could respond, the door opened again. This time it wasn't a doctor or a stranger. It was someone Sandra didn't recognize, but Keanu's eyes widened in shock. A man in his 40s stepped into the room, holding a faded photograph in his hand. His voice shook as he spoke. "You probably don't remember me. Years ago, when my family lost our home in a fire, you gave me money to rebuild. You didn't even know me. I never got the chance to thank you. But I kept this photograph. The day my family stood in front of the new house. I came here today because I heard you were sick, and I wanted you to see you gave us a life back. He placed the photograph on the table beside the bed. It showed a family smiling in front of a small house, their faces full of joy. Keanu's lips parted, his breath unsteady. He reached for the picture with trembling hands, his eyes scanning it with disbelief. You saved us, the man whispered. Don't you dare think you've given up, because there are too many of us out here living because you didn't. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had always known Keanu was kind, but seeing these people one after another reminded her how much deeper his kindness ran than anyone ever realized. When the man left, Keanu lay back against the pillow, clutching the photograph to his chest. I never thought they remembered, he whispered. Of course they remembered, Sandra said, brushing his hair back gently. You think you're invisible because you don't ask for recognition. But every life you touched is a mark that never faded. The day passed slowly, with quiet conversations and moments of heavy reflection. Keanu dozed off for a while, his breathing soft. Sandra watched him closely, afraid to look away, as if his presence might slip away if she blinked too long. When he woke again, the sky outside was turning dark. The hospital lights flickered on, bathing the room in a pale glow. Keanu turned his head toward her, his voice quiet but firm. Sandra, what if I don't make it? She froze, her chest tightening. Don't talk like that. I need to, he insisted, his eyes locking with hers. If I don't make it, I need you to promise me something. Her hands shook as she gripped his. Don't make me promise something like that. Please, he whispered, his voice breaking. Promise me you'll keep reminding people that kindness matters, that even the smallest act can save someone's life. Promise me you'll carry that if I can't. Tears streamed down her face. You'll carry it yourself, Keanu, you will. But if you need me to promise, then I promise. I'll keep your light alive. But you're not going anywhere, not yet. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. For a moment, the beeping of the machines seemed louder, sharper, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then suddenly, his chest heaved, and a deep cough shook him. Alarms blared as the monitors spiked. Sandra cried out, her hands gripping his arm. Nurses rushed in, followed by the doctor, their voices urgent. Stay with us, Mr. Reeves, one of them called out as they worked quickly. Sandra was pushed back slightly, her heart pounding as she watched them fight to steady him. The fear in her chest was unbearable, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like forever, the machines calmed again. His breathing steadied, though weak. The doctor sighed in relief. He's stable, but this was a warning. He cannot afford to lose his will. Not now! Sandra rushed back to his side, gripping his hand tightly. You scared me, she whispered, her voice breaking. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her weakly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, she said firmly. Just promise me you'll keep fighting. Don't you dare leave me like this. He managed the faintest smile, though his eyes were still tired. I'll try. For you. The night settled heavy, but in that heaviness was also a choice. Keanu knew the road ahead would test him in ways he had never been tested before. But now, he was no longer fighting just for himself. He was fighting for the people who remembered, for the lives he had touched, and for the woman who refused to let go of his hand. The night after the scare was long and heavy. Sandra barely slept, her hand never leaving Keanu's. Every rise and fall of his chest became the only thing she cared about. Each beep of the machines felt like a heartbeat she couldn't afford to lose. Keanu drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes he whispered things she could barely hear. Memories, regrets, questions that lingered in his soul. At one point, just before dawn, he opened his eyes fully and stared at her. Sandra, he whispered, his voice weak but steady. Are you really going to stay? Even if this gets worse? She leaned close, her eyes holding his. Yes, I told you, I'm not leaving. You don't have to face this alone. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Then maybe I still have a chance. The morning light returned, pale and soft. The hospital began to stir with its usual rhythm. Nurses moved through the halls, doctors whispered in corners. But Keanu's room was different. It was not just a place of sickness anymore. It was a place of memory, kindness, and the quiet strength of two people who refused to let go. That afternoon, something unexpected happened again. One by one, more visitors began to appear. Not celebrities, not people from Hollywood, but ordinary souls whose lives had been touched by Keanu's quiet acts. A young woman who had once been homeless stood nervously at the door. "You gave me money when I was on the street," she said softly. "But more than that, you looked me in the eye when no one else did. You made me feel human again." "I never forgot." An older man with a worn cap stepped in next. "I worked as a security guard. You used to bring us coffee during long shoots. You never treated us like we were invisible." "I just wanted to say thank you," a nurse from another ward added. "You once stopped to talk to a patient here years ago." It meant everything to him. He told me about it until the day he passed. The stories kept coming, each one small on its own. But together they painted a picture of a man who had quietly lifted people without expecting anyone to notice. Sandra sat beside him, overwhelmed by what she was hearing. She had always known Keanu was humble, but now she saw the true depth of his humanity reflected back through the voices of strangers. Keanu's eyes shimmered with tears. He didn't try to hide. "I didn't think anyone would remember," he whispered again, his voice breaking. Sandra squeezed his hand tighter. They remembered. "And so will I." But just as hope filled the room, another challenge came. Late that evening, his body trembled again, his breath shallow, the machines beeping sharply. Nurses rushed in, the doctor following close behind. Sandra was pulled aside as they worked quickly. Her heart pounded, her hands shaking. She pressed her back against the wall, whispering to herself, "Please don't take him away. Not now. Not when he's just starting to believe again." The struggle felt endless, the room filled with urgent voices and flashing monitors. But after long, tense minutes, his breathing steadied again. The doctor looked at Sandra, his face lined with exhaustion. "He's fighting harder than we expected. It's his will that's keeping him here." Sandra rushed back to his side, tears streaming. "You scared me again," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his hand. Keanu's eyes opened weakly, his voice faint but clear. "I told you I'd try. I'm not ready to leave yet." From that night on, something shifted. Day by day, he grew a little stronger. His voice gained more weight, his hands steadied, his eyes stayed open longer. It was slow, fragile progress, but it was real. And through it all, Sandra never left. Weeks passed. The hospital room that once felt like a place of loneliness now felt alive with warmth. Flowers filled the corners. Cards and letters from fans, friends, and strangers arrived daily. The boy from the cafe returned with more soup. Mrs. Lawson came with fresh flowers. The musician played again in the corner. It became a place of gathering, of shared humanity. One morning, as the sun streamed bright and golden through the window, the doctor finally smiled at him. "Mr. Reeves, I think it's time we start planning for your release. Your body has fought hard. Now it's time to heal outside these walls." Keanu's breath caught. Freedom. A chance to breathe air that wasn't sterilized. He turned to Sandra, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You did this," he whispered. She shook her head gently. "No, you did. You just needed to be reminded you weren't alone." The day he left the hospital, a small crowd gathered quietly outside. Not paparazzi, not flashing cameras, but ordinary people. They clapped softly as he walked out slowly, supported by Sandra's steady arm. He looked around, overwhelmed, realizing the world had not forgotten him. As he stepped into the sunlight, he paused, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought I had no one. But I see now. I was never alone. Every kindness we give comes back. Sometimes it just takes time. Thank you." The crowd cheered softly, their faces glowing with respect. Later, when they were alone, Sandra looked at him with a quiet smile. "So what now?" Keanu looked at her, his eyes filled with both gratitude and something unspoken. "Now, I live, not just survive, and I don't do it alone anymore," she smiled, her eyes shining. "That's all I wanted to hear. They walked together slowly into the sunlight. No cameras, no scripts, no stage. Just two people, hand in hand, carrying a story that had been rewritten by kindness, resilience, and the reminder that even in the darkest rooms, light finds its way back.